for a rebound by faith in Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining me again today as we continue in our Christmas themes. And today we're going to look at Mary's song in Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55. And we're going to focus in particular today on verses 46 to 49, where Mary reminds us that God exceeds our expectations. But before we look at Mary, let me tell you a story about a couple who had become increasingly alarmed about the dangers of this world. And in particular, they were worried about the threats of war and nuclear war landing where they were living. And so they began a serious search to find the safest place on the globe where they could live and avoid that kind of conflict. Well, they did their homework, they traveled, they searched the globe, and eventually they landed on a location that they thought would be ultimate in security for them, where they would be safe and free from all concern about war. On Christmas Eve, they sent a Christmas card to their pastor from their new home. Their new home was in a paradise. It was in the Falkland Islands. And a very short time thereafter, war broke out, as you know, between Britain and Argentina. And the place they had chosen to be the safest place on earth proved to be a lot less than that. Well, things change in our lives. We can't always predict. Napoleon, greatly humbled by the end of his life, said this in reference to all he had seen in his life from the times of ego and pride, when he thought that God was on the side of the ones who had the biggest cannons. Now at the end of his life says, man proposes, but God disposes. Well, as I look at Mary's hymn and as I look at the life of Mary, I find in Mary a constant source of amazement because of her faith and the humility with which she approaches her relationship to the Lord. And in Mary's song in Luke chapter 1, we get a taste of that. And we want to look in particular today at her comment that really highlights for us how God exceeds our expectations in verses 46 to 49. This is what she writes. My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he's been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. It is a reminder that God uses the weak, he uses the frail, he uses the foolish in the eyes of this world to accomplish his purposes. Just to give you a couple of examples of how God has historically done that, think about Israel as a nation, a people of slaves living in Egypt, whom God calls out of slavery to become a nation of priests for the nations. That was the calling on Israel. Think about Joseph, rejected by his brothers, and yet providentially placed by God to be a form of redeemer, really pointing to the work that Jesus would do in redeeming his people. Joseph wasn't the one that anybody expected anything from, rejected by his brothers, but God used him. Think about David. King David was the youngest of the brothers, so unexpected to be king that when his own father called his sons together to parade before Samuel to figure out which one was going to be the king, he never even bothered to ask David to come. But David ultimately would be the one who would be anointed as king and become the greatest king that Israel had ever known. A man referred to as being after God's own heart. Think about the people whose lives have been touched by Jesus Christ. In the New Testament, fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes, military personnel, civil servants, jailers, all testimonies to his grace. Mary expresses the wonder of being God's servant, and I hope that we never lose that sense of wonder at the privilege of being able to be a part of what God is doing and having him work through us in his kingdom's work in this world. Mary expresses that wonder of being God's servant, the privilege of being invited into partnership in kingdom work, the joy of having God work through her. She says in chapter 1, verse 38, in this great statement of faith that just rivets my soul, she says, "Be it unto me according to your word." Man, if only I had the faith to address every situation in my life with the faith of Mary. Be it unto me according to your word. Mary reminds us of how God exceeds our expectations regularly. He brings a peace that calms fear. He brings a peace that dispels doubt. He brings a peace that accepts the challenges that we face. How? Well, when we look at Mary, we see that she did it because her focus was on God and all that he was doing. And her response was, "My soul glorifies the Lord." As we think about the incarnation of Christ in this Christmas season, we are reminded of how God exceeds our expectations. And may it result in worship that comes from our hearts as we sing with Mary, "My soul glorifies the Lord."